The shell hits 20 yards to the left and the driver doesn't brake. He knows the difference between artillery finding the range and artillery that's found it, and this is still finding. He drops into four-wheel drive on the slope below Jebel Orbata, and the rear wheels stop fighting the scree, and in his shirt pocket is a folded slip of paper with grid coordinates the 601st Tank Destroyers need to find their firing positions before the 10th Panzer Division's armor finishes crossing the valley floor. The telephone wire running along the track was cut in the German preparation. The radios in these mountain folds are useless. The signal bounces off stone and dies. The only way those tank destroyers find their positions in time is if this paper reaches the forward observer in the next few minutes. He gets there. What the Jeep was designed to do, and what the German generals who survived the war spent years trying to explain to their own staff colleges, was connect an army to itself in conditions that severed every other connection. Tunisia was only the first place that mattered. It would not be the last. The Germans understood mechanized warfare. They had mastered it. What they had not prepared for was this. Germany's vehicle doctrine in 1939 was not a mistake. It was a calibrated response to a strategic situation that left no margin for a long war. The Wehrmacht had demonstrated in Poland and France what coordinated armored force could accomplish. Not simply by destroying enemy formations, but by moving faster than the enemy command system could process the information it was receiving, until the army stopped functioning as an organization and became a collection of men who no longer knew what they were supposed to do. France fell in 6 weeks. The doctrine worked. The Kübelwagen, developed by Porsche's team and manufactured by Volkswagen, served that doctrine precisely. Air-cooled engine, immune to the radiator punctures that disabled road vehicles in rough country. Torsion bar suspension with a swing axle that let each wheel respond independently to the ground beneath it. A belly pan that allowed the vehicle to slide over obstacles rather than dig into them, so a stuck Kübelwagen could often be rocked free by the crew without a winch. Light, under 1,600 pounds. Two-wheel drive, because German planning had calculated that four-wheel drive was unnecessary added weight for campaigns fought along roads and through countries with functioning infrastructure. For France, that calculation was correct. For Poland, correct. For the war Germany needed to win quickly, the Kübelwagen was right. German staff car transport reflected the same philosophy at a higher register. Precision engineering, close tolerances, machines built with a level of mechanical refinement that American manufacturers considered excessive. Precision has a cost that does not appear in the initial design calculation. It requires specialized maintenance, specific components that cannot be substituted in the field, supply chains that stay intact across time and distance. When the war expanded beyond the campaigns the doctrine was designed to win, when North Africa meant sand in every seal and heat that distorted German rubber, when the Eastern Front meant temperatures that cracked German components and froze lubricants specified for Central European winters, the sophistication became a liability. Parts were harder to source. Technicians were harder to find. Volume suffered. The Wehrmacht produced roughly 50,000 Kübelwagens across the entire war. Germany had built for the war they intended to fight. America built for the war they expected to last. In the summer of 1940, watching newsreel footage of French columns burning on the road from Sedan, the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps understood what it meant. American mobile forces were fighting a 1940 war with 1918 equipment. Reconnaissance was still partly horse-dependent. The motorcycles used for infantry liaison were single-rider instruments with no payload and a casualty rate commanders avoided examining too carefully. Civilian automobiles pressed into service for command transport were too heavy, too road-bound, and too fragile for the terrain that actual combat produced. The specification issued on July 11, 1940, was written by officers who had spent months studying German combat film and speaking to French survivors. It asked for something nearly impossible: 3 men and a crew-served weapon. 4-wheel drive with a 2-speed transfer case, 18 inches of fore depth, a 60% grade capability, a silhouette low enough that a prone gunner could fire over the hood, a weight ceiling of 1,275 pounds, and a functioning prototype in 49 days. American Bantam Car Company won the initial competition. 18 employees, roughly $40,000 in operating capital. Their lead engineer, Carl Probst, drove overnight from Detroit to Bantam's plant in Butler, Pennsylvania, and produced a complete engineering specification in 5 days. 5 days from a blank page to a full design. The prototype ran on schedule, and it worked. What Willys Overland and Ford eventually standardized from that competition, the Willys MB and the Ford GPW, built from identical drawings so that any part from either production line would fit any Jeep produced anywhere, was not primarily a vehicle. It was a decision about what kind of army America was going to build. The final Jeep weighed 2,453 pounds, more than the specification, because what testing revealed was that the capability the additional weight provided, stability under load, cargo capacity that matched field reality rather than planning assumptions, was something the Army found it could not give up. The Go Devil engine produced 60 horsepower. That number alone tells you almost nothing. What it meant in practice was a vehicle that could propel men and equipment across ground that stopped trucks, in temperatures that cracked German oil, through terrain that German staff officers had dismissed from their vehicle routing calculations because their vehicles couldn't cross it. American engineering was not technically superior to German engineering. What it had accepted from the first line of the specification was that simplicity at scale mattered more than precision at the unit level. No special tools required for field maintenance. No specialist technicians at the unit level. Apart from any Willys MB fit any Ford GPW because both were manufactured to the same tolerances, the tolerances that accepted the imperfection that actual war at scale produces. A battalion mechanic with a standard wrench kit could rebuild the engine in the field. That was the design intent, not an afterthought. 640,000 Jeeps before the war ended, against the Wehrmacht's 50,000 Kübelwagens. The ratio doesn't simply describe industrial advantage. It describes a philosophical decision. America had decided, before the shooting started, that its military vehicle would be built for a long war, distributed, uncertain, fought across terrain no planner had correctly mapped, by soldiers whose mechanical training no procurement office could guarantee. The Jeep could be parachuted in a cargo bundle, lashed to the side of a landing craft, put to work towing a light anti-tank gun, or used to carry a wounded man, a radio, an officer to a position no German threat calculation had included. Eisenhower listed the Jeep among the machines most vital to Allied success, alongside the bulldozer, the C-47, and the 2.5-ton truck. None of these, he wrote, is designed for combat. He didn't call it a weapon. A weapon destroys. What the Jeep connected was an army to itself, horizontally, at terrain speed, through the gaps that radio and wire couldn't follow. The German generals who came to understand that said so. The ones who survived Tunisia said it first. Before first light on March 23, 1943, the 10th Panzer Division moved from the Macnassy Passes into the El Guettar Valley. More than 50 tanks, motorized infantry behind them. The objective was the 1st Infantry Division's positions on the high ground above the valley floor, the Big Red One, which had been in North Africa since the torch landings and had taken its hardest losses at Kasserine Pass 5 weeks before. Breakthrough here, and the American supply lines to the coast are cut. The route was the valley. Terry Allen had spent the 3 days before March 23rd pushing his regiments into the rough terrain flanking the valley. Not along the tracks and roads that German reconnaissance had surveyed, but into the hillsides and wadis that German maps had labeled impassable to wheeled vehicles. The 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion had moved its M3s into position in the dark, hull down in locations the 10th Panzer's command had not placed in its threat calculations. At 0600 hours, the German artillery preparation began and cut the telephone wire running along the tracks to Allen's forward units. Radio was unreliable in these mountain folds, where signals scattered off stone faces and died. Allen's staff knew where his units were. His units knew where they were. What neither knew, in real time, was what the other was doing. And the 600 first needed updated grid coordinates, because the German armor was advancing from a direction the morning brief hadn't projected. Jeeps went out. Not one, several. moving simultaneously from different points in different directions across terrain that German reconnaissance had dismissed as impassable to vehicles. The drivers crossed wadis at angles that would have beached a road car permanently, climbed slopes in low range where traction required all four wheels engaged, reached positions in the hillsides above the valley that German vehicle routing had excluded from the plan. The 600 first had their updated coordinates before the German armor reached the center of the valley floor. The 10th Panzer came in the formation it had trained for. Mutual support between armor, infantry protecting the flanks, a concentrated push down the predictable axis of the valley road. What they found was fire from angles their intelligence had not placed American anti-tank weapons. The M3s were on a ridgeline the Germans hadn't covered because their analysis said American vehicles couldn't have reached it. A defile to the south, marked impassable on German maps, was occupied. American artillery, coordinated by forward observers whose positions had been updated by the same Jeep traffic crossing the same terrain, found its range within minutes of first contact. By mid-morning, the 10th Panzer was absorbing losses it hadn't projected. By afternoon, it had stopped. German armor burned in the Guettar Valley before the 10th Panzer withdrew. It was one of the first unmistakable demonstrations that American ground forces could take a major German armored attack and hold. That American doctrine could absorb what German armor delivered. The Second Corps after-action report credited the tank destroyer positioning and the artillery coordination. It did not isolate the Jeeps as a specific causal variable because the Jeeps were everywhere, and things that are everywhere become part of the baseline. When Axis forces surrendered in Tunisia in May 1943, American teams processing captured motor pools found something consistent. Jeeps taken in earlier engagements were still running, in active use. German mechanics had maintained them, not for lack of German vehicles, but because in North African terrain, the captured Jeeps were more capable for cross-country work. A German sergeant choosing between a Kübelwagen and a captured Jeep for a reconnaissance run through rough ground was making the choice that German Army headquarters couldn't formally acknowledge. German technical intelligence had examined captured Jeeps as early as 1942. Their assessment noted the four-wheel drive system, the ground clearance, the simplicity of the maintenance profile. It also noted, accurately, that the Jeep's manufacturing tolerances were loose by German engineering standards. The materials were not refined. The finish was industrial, rather than precise. By German engineering criteria, the Jeep was crude. The assessment did not address what crudeness meant in a production context. That a vehicle built to loose tolerances can be manufactured in any facility capable of working metal, by workers with minimal training, with every part fitting every other vehicle built to the same standard. Precision is not reproducible at volume. Crudeness is. German engineering knew how to build a better vehicle. What it had not built was 640,000 of them, because precision and volume are competing demands, and the Wehrmacht came down on the side of precision. German generals who gave accounts to American historians after 1945 returned to the same observation when American mechanization came up. The Jeep was where it should not have been, the wrong side of the ridge. In terrain, the planning had dismissed. At the forward position, their doctrine had left uncovered because the map said no wheeled vehicle could reach it. The distribution of actual movement capability down to small unit commanders, rather than concentrating vehicles at headquarters and behind the lines, produced an adaptability that German doctrine could observe, describe, and not replicate once a campaign was in motion. You cannot change what you built while you are fighting with it. Germany built something excellent for the war they intended. The Kübelwagen was lighter, more precisely engineered, better matched to the doctrine that produced it. The Jeep was heavier, simpler, and built on the assumption that the war would last longer than planned. The terrain would be worse than any map, and the man driving would be 20 years old with no background in mechanics. That assumption was correct, not because America was wiser, because America was honest about uncertainty, in a way that German strategic planning could not afford to be. The Wehrmacht built for the war they needed to win quickly. America built for the war it expected to survive. The Jeep is in the Smithsonian now. Eisenhower's name is on the highway the American Army helped pay for. The Kübelwagen is in private collections, admired for the elegance of what Porsche's team accomplished under constraint. None of that elegance survived contact with what the war actually required. When German generals said the Jeep outran everything they built, they were not talking about engine output or top speed. They were talking about the distance between a doctrine and the war that doctrine encountered, and what it cost a nation to have planned for the shorter war. America covered that distance in a vehicle that weighed 2,453 pounds and could be repaired with no specialized tools. Germany covered it on foot. That distance is still studied in staff colleges because the question of whether to optimize for the war you expect or prepare for the war you get has no permanent answer. Every generation answers it again, with every procurement fight between precision and volume, every doctrine revision built on the assumption that the next war will resemble the last. The Jeep is one of the cases that survives every revision, one of the arguments that hasn't gone stale. If this is the channel you come to for the arguments that haven't gone stale, subscribe. Every week, the story underneath the story.